Stop looking at the number. Seriously, stop staring at the debt clock. The media loves to parade the $38 trillion figure around like it is some kind of impending apocalypse, like a credit card bill that is about to come due, or a sign of political incompetence. They tell you it is the result of reckless spending. They tell you it is a mistake. They tell you that if we just elected the right people or balanced the budget, we could pay it off and return to sanity. They are lying to you. I have analyzed sovereign bond markets, sat in the boardrooms where yield curves are calculated, and watched the mechanics of the global monetary system from the inside. And I am here to tell you the single most terrifying truth about the global economy. The national debt isn't a bug in the system. It is the operating system. It was never meant to be paid off. In fact, if the United States government actually paid off its debt tomorrow, if they somehow found the cash to redeem every treasury bond, the entire global economy would instantly cease to exist. Your bank account would vanish. The dollar would disappear. The machine would stop. We are living in a financial cage constructed of compound interest, built by architects who died 3 centuries ago. To understand why you are working harder for money that buys less, you have to stop looking at the debt as a liability and start seeing it for what it really is. A mechanism of control and wealth transfer that is working exactly as it was designed. To understand the trap, you have to unlearn everything you think you know about money. In our modern world, you have been conditioned to believe that a dollar is an asset, a store of value. It is not. In our modern fiat system, every single dollar in your pocket, in your bank account, or in your retirement fund is a note of debt. The mechanism is deceptively simple, yet it hides a dark secret. When the United States government needs money, it does not have it. It does not dig up gold from Fort Knox. It issues a treasury bond. A bond is nothing more than a glorified IOU, a promise to pay back money in the future plus interest. The commercial banks and the Federal Reserve buy this debt. And how does the Federal Reserve pay for it? It creates the currency out of thin air specifically to buy that debt. This means that the dollar is the debt. They are two sides of the same coin. If the government paid off the debt, they would have to take every dollar out of circulation to do it. The money supply would drop to zero. So, when politicians stand on a podium and promise to eliminate the national debt, they are either displaying a profound ignorance of monetary mechanics, or they are gaslighting you. The system is designed to expand. It must expand. Because if the borrowing stops, the money stops. And if the money stops, civilization as we know it collapses. This trap wasn't built overnight. It is not an accident of modern capitalism. It was engineered by 4 specific men across 3 centuries, each adding a layer to the prison walls. It began in 1694 with a man named William Paterson. Before Paterson, debt was a personal failing. Kings borrowed money like you or I borrow money. They borrowed it, they paid it back, or they went broke. When a king defaulted, the lenders lost everything. It was a risky, unstable game. Paterson, a Scottish merchant, approached King William III of England with a radical proposal that would reshape civilization. England was broke and at war with France. Paterson proposed a loan of £1.2 million, a massive sum at the time. But here was the innovation. The government would never pay back the principal. Instead, it would merely pay the interest on the debt, forever. In exchange, Paterson's group of lenders was incorporated as the Bank of England, and they were given the exclusive right to issue paper notes backed by that government debt. They turned debt from a temporary burden into a permanent asset. They realized that a king who pays back his loan is a useless customer. The profit is in the interest, not the principal. This was the birth of the perpetual debt system. It effectively mortgaged the future labor of the citizenry to the holders of the debt. Every time a bond was issued, the government was pledging the future taxes of its people to service that bond. You are born into this contract. You never signed it, but you are the collateral. The second layer of the trap was laid a century later by Nathan Rothschild. If Paterson invented perpetual debt, the Rothschild family industrialized it. By 1815, the Rothschild banking dynasty had established branches in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples. They created the first truly international financial network. Nathan Rothschild's genius wasn't just in lending money to governments. It was in creating a secondary market for that debt. He made government bonds tradable before this. If you lent money to a king, you were stuck with the loan. Rothschild created a system where you could sell that debt to someone else. This turned sovereign debt into the world's safest, most liquid asset. It meant that French investors could own British debt, and German banks could use Austrian debt as collateral. This interconnected web of obligation meant that no single government could simply walk away from its debt without crashing the entire European financial system. It created the concept of too big to fail nearly 200 years ago. By making the debt liquid and tradable globally, Rothschild ensured that the chains of debt were unbreakable because they were held by everyone, everywhere. But the system still had a limit. It was constrained by gold and by the fact that banks could still fail if they made bad bets. That limit was removed in 1913 by the third architect, J.P. Morgan, and the founders of the Federal Reserve. Following the financial panic of 1907, the banking elite of America realized they needed a lender of last resort, a backstop that could force the taxpayer to bail out the system if their gambling went wrong. They met in secret on Jekyll Island to draft the legislation that would become the Federal Reserve Act. They sold it to Congress and the American public as a way to stabilize the currency and prevent bank runs. In reality, they created a mechanism for infinite debt monetization. The creation of the Federal Reserve removed the ceiling on how much the government could borrow. Before the Fed, the government could only borrow as much as there was private gold or savings to lend. After the Fed, the government could borrow theoretically infinite amounts, because the Fed was created with the power to buy those bonds with printed money. This completed the cycle. The government issues the bond, the Fed prints the money to buy it, the government spends the money, and the taxpayer is left on the hook for the interest. It turned the U.S. economy into a perpetual motion machine of debt creation, limited only by the public's willingness to pay taxes and tolerate inflation. The final lock on the cage was secured in the late 20th century by Paul Volcker and the modern technocrats of the IMF. By the 1970s, developing nations had borrowed billions of dollars. When interest rates skyrocketed under Volcker's fight against inflation, these countries couldn't pay. In a normal world, they would have defaulted, and the banks that lent them the money would have taken the loss. But that is not how this system works. Instead, the financial establishment orchestrated bailouts through the International Monetary Fund. But these weren't bailouts for the countries. They were bailouts for the banks. The IMF lent these desperate nations money to pay the interest they owed to Western banks, but the loans came with brutal conditions: structural adjustment programs. These nations were forced to sell off their state assets, privatize their resources, and cut social spending to ensure the interest payments kept flowing. Volcker's legacy proved that debt could be used as a tool of geopolitical conquest. You don't need to invade a country with tanks to conquer it. You just need to indebt it so heavily that you control its entire economic output. It proved that the debt is never meant to be extinguished. It is meant to be restructured, rolled over, and maintained as a permanent lever of power. Now, look at where we are today. $38 trillion in U.S. debt. $315 trillion in global debt. The math has become impossible since money is created by borrowing principal, but the money to pay the interest is not created in that same transaction. There is always more debt in the system than there is money to pay it. This creates a mathematical imperative for perpetual growth. The economy must grow, not because we need more goods and services, but because we need more money to service the interest on the old money. We are running on a hamster wheel that must spin faster and faster just to stay in place. So who actually owns this debt? Who are we paying? Roughly $20 trillion of the U.S. debt is owned by the American public and institutions: pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and banks. This sounds benign until you realize what it actually represents. It represents a massive transfer of wealth from the working class to the asset holding class every year. Hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes are stripped from the wages of workers. This money is not used to build bridges or schools. It is used to pay the interest on treasury bonds. Who holds those bonds? The wealthy, the asset managers, the large corporations? It is a reverse Robin Hood scheme on a galactic scale, siphoning productivity from the bottom and funneling it to the top, all sanctified by the full faith and credit of the United States government. You might be asking if the US prints so much money, why hasn't the dollar collapsed yet? Why aren't we Zimbabwe? This is the masterstroke of the American empire. We exported our inflation. By creating the petrodollar system, we ensured that the world needed dollars to buy oil. This meant that every country on Earth needed to hold our debt. We printed the paper, and the world gave us cars, electronics, and resources. We lived beyond our means for 50 years because the rest of the world was forced to absorb our inflation. But the tide is turning. The BRICS nations, the central banks buying gold at record paces, they are realizing that the US debt is a trap. They are trying to exit the system. And this is why the situation is becoming critical now. If the world stops buying our debt, the Federal Reserve has to buy all of it. That is the doom loop. That is when the currency begins to die. The architects of this system know that the math is failing. They know that 38 trillion cannot be paid. They have no intention of paying it. The endgame is not repayment. The endgame is the Great Reset. You are hearing about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. You are seeing the push for programmable money. Do not mistake these for convenient technological upgrades. These are the bars of the new cage. If the current debt-based system collapses under its own weight, they need a way to ensure you cannot flee the currency. They need a system where they can prevent a bank run by simply turning off your access to your funds. They want to transition from a system of indirect debt slavery, where you pay via inflation and taxes, to a system of direct monetary control, where your ability to transact is a privilege granted by the state, not a right. This is the reality of the water in which we swim. The national debt is not a number to be debated by politicians in suits. It is a leash. It is a mechanism of control that dictates foreign policy, domestic policy, and the quality of your daily life. It creates the inflation that eats your savings. It creates the asset bubbles that make housing unaffordable. It necessitates the taxes that lower your standard of living. We are approaching the end of a long-term debt cycle. The volatility we see in the markets, the rage in the political sphere, the disparity in wealth, these are the tremors before the earthquake. The four architects built a dynasty that has lasted 300 years, but no Ponzi scheme can defy the laws of mathematics forever. You cannot stop the earthquake. The forces at play are too large, the momentum too great. But you can refuse to be inside the building when it falls. You can choose to see the system for what it is. You can understand that in this design, debt is their asset, but it is your liability. You can understand that money in the bank is not wealth, but merely a claim on a system that is mathematically guaranteed to devalue that claim over time. Real wealth is not found in the paper promises of a government drowning in its own obligations. Real wealth is tangible. Real wealth is independent of the system. The first step to escaping the trap is realizing that you are in one. If you want to understand the true mechanics of this financial machine, if you want to see the charts, the data, and the history that the mainstream financial news refuses to cover because it contradicts their narrative, then you need to be paying attention to what we are doing here. We are dissecting the anatomy of the global economy piece by piece. We are looking for the exits. If you are ready to stop listening to the noise and start understanding the signal, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We are going to go much deeper in the coming weeks, discussing exactly how to position yourself when the debt cycle finally turns. The system was designed to never let you go, but knowledge is the key to the lock. The debt is permanent. Your participation in it doesn't have to be.